Just pull the plug, darling. No one will question it. They thought he was finished. Machines kept his lungs moving. His eyes stared at white ceiling tiles without seeing. The man they called the Dragon of Seoul, the architect of the Azure Syndicate's iron grip on 3 continents, now lay silent, shattered, helpless. But behind those empty eyes, Kaelith Sol was wide awake. His body lay motionless on the hospital bed when his wife leaned close enough that her perfume, the one he'd bought her in Paris, filled his nostrils, close enough to whisper what she believed would never reach his ears. Her voice was silk over poison. "The doctors say you'll never wake up," she murmured, trailing one perfectly manicured nail down the dragon tattoos that coiled across his chest. "I can't wait to spend your fortune with the man who put you here." Inside that paralyzed body, rage erupted like wildfire. His heart rate spiked, just once, just barely, invisible to everyone except the exhausted doctor reviewing charts in the corner of the room. And in that moment, a man who had survived assassination attempts, gang wars, and government raids realized the most dangerous enemy wasn't the bomb that had torn through his car. It was the woman who kissed his forehead while planning his death. But there was one problem with her plan. Someone noticed when everyone else looked away. Before this story continues, I need to know you're real. Comment your location right now. I don't care if it's just your country or city, just type it. Because here's what you need to understand. If you don't comment, if you just lurk and leave, YouTube buries this video. And somewhere right now, there's someone scrolling, trapped in their own nightmare, feeling powerless and alone, and this story could be the thing that changes their perspective. But they'll never see it because you stayed silent. So comment, prove you're here. Prove this matters, because your silence has consequences you'll never see. Dr. Vaelen Rho had exactly 3 rules for surviving her exile to the high-security ward of Crescent Bay Medical Center. 1. Don't ask about the armed guards outside patient rooms. 2. Don't get emotionally involved with criminals, no matter how human they seem. And most importantly, don't look too closely at the inconsistencies in their medical charts. Tonight, she was about to shatter all 3. The head nurse, a woman with steel gray hair and eyes that had seen too much, slid a tablet across the station desk like it carried a disease. Room 9, private patient, around-the-clock monitoring. You're his overnight. Vaelen glanced at the screen. Patient Kaelith Sol, 34, male. Multiple trauma from vehicular explosion. Current status, persistent vegetative state. The Mafia boss, the nurse added, her voice flat. The one all over the news. Wife's been here every day. The perfect grieving widow. Security team rotates every 6 hours. Don't bother them, they won't bother you. Vaelen felt her stomach tighten. She'd been demoted to this ward 6 months ago after she'd fought too hard to save a patient the hospital administration wanted to let go. Caring too much, they'd called it. Inability to maintain professional distance. Now they stuck her with the cases no one else wanted, the lost causes, the monsters. Any special protocols? She asked. The nurse's expression didn't change. Keep him alive. That's it. His wife has medical power of attorney, so if she asks for anything, you clear it through Dr. Morrison first. And Rho? She paused. This one's not worth losing your license over. Whatever you see, whatever you think you see, remember he's already gone. The walk to room 9 felt longer than it should have. Vaelen's sneakers squeaked softly on the polished floor. She passed 3 security guards, each one studying her ID badge with the intensity of men who killed, for a living. The door was heavy, reinforced with a small window that showed nothing but darkness inside. She pushed it open. The first thing that hit her was the silence. Not the normal hush of a hospital room, but something deeper, heavier, like the air itself was holding its breath. Machines beeped steadily. A ventilator hissed and released. An IV drip marked time in precise, measured drops. And on the bed, illuminated by the cold glow of monitors, lay a man who looked like he'd been carved from marble and then shattered. Kaelith Sol. She'd seen his photo in the news. The Dragon of Seoul, they called him, head of the Azure Syndicate, responsible for everything from smuggling to money laundering, though nothing had ever been proven. In those photos, he'd been terrifying. Sharp suit, sharper eyes, a presence that seemed to command the very space around him. Now he was a broken sculpture. His face was swollen on one side, a surgical bandage covering his left temple. His bare chest was a canvas of tattoos, intricate dragons, and symbols she didn't recognize, all rising and falling with the mechanical rhythm of the ventilator. His arms lay at his sides, muscled but motionless. His eyes were open. That stopped her. They were open but unfocused, staring at nothing, seeing nothing. Or so everyone believed. Vaelen approached slowly, the way she might approach a sleeping predator. She checked his chart on the bedside tablet. Traumatic brain injury, extensive damage to motor cortex. Glasgow Coma Scale, 3, the lowest possible score. Brain activity, present but minimal. Prognosis, poor. Yet something made her pause. She'd seen dozens of vegetative patients. Hundreds. There was a quality to their stillness, a complete absence that was unmistakable. This man had that stillness. But there was something else. Something she couldn't name. She moved to check his pupils, pulling out her penlight. Mr. Sol, I'm Dr. Rho. I'm going to examine your eyes. He didn't expect a response. Protocol required verbal cues anyway, in case some part of the brain was still processing language. She lifted his left eyelid gently. The pupil was dilated, but responsive to light, contracting slowly when she shone the beam. Normal. She moved to the right eye, and as she brought the light up, before she even switched it on, his pupil contracted. Just slightly, just for a fraction of a second, then dilated again when she pulled the light away. Her breath caught. She repeated the motion, brought the light close. The pupil contracted in anticipation, pulled it away, dilation. That wasn't a reflex, that was tracking. "Oh my God," she whispered. She glanced at the monitors. Heart rate steady at 62, blood pressure normal, oxygen saturation at 98%. Everything looked like a man in a vegetative state, except his eyes had just followed her movement. She looked back at his face, those dark eyes still unfocused, still staring at nothing. But was it nothing? Or was it everything? "Can you hear me?" she asked softly. Nothing. No response. No flicker. She felt foolish. It must have been a coincidence, a random fluctuation. The brain did strange things after trauma. She returned to the chart, making a note to check again in an hour when the door opened behind her. The woman who entered moved like royalty. Tall, elegant, wearing a black dress that probably cost more than Vaelen made in a month. Her hair was pulled back in a perfect chignon. Her makeup was flawless despite the late hour. Lyra Sol, the wife. "You're the new night doctor," Lyra said. It wasn't a question. Her voice was smooth, cultured, with just the faintest accent Vaelen couldn't place. "Dr. Rho, yes. I'll be monitoring your husband tonight." Lyra moved to the bedside with practiced grace, and Vaelen noticed something. The elegance was perfect. Too perfect. Like a performance that had been rehearsed 1,000 times. "How is he?" Lyra asked, reaching out to touch Kaelith's hand. "Stable. No changes from the previous shift." "No changes?" Lyra's lips curved into something that might have been a smile. "It's been 3 weeks. I keep hoping, but the other doctors say I shouldn't." Vaelen nodded professionally. "Brain injuries are unpredictable. Some patients do show improvement over time. But not him." Lyra's fingers traced the tattoos on Kaelith's arm, following the scales of a dragon that wound from his wrist to his shoulder. He was always so strong, so loud. Every room he entered, he owned it. Now look at him. Silent, helpless. There was something in her tone. Not grief, not quite satisfaction either. Something cold and measured, like she was stating facts about a stock portfolio. "If there's anything you need," Vaelen began, but Lyra cut her off. "Privacy, just for a few minutes, to say goodnight." It was a dismissal. Vaelen nodded and stepped outside, pulling. The door closed behind her. But something made her stop. That look in Lyra's eyes, that tone, the way she'd said silent and helpless like they were victories. Vaelen glanced at the security guards. They were focused outward, on potential threats coming down the hallway, not on what happened inside the room. There was a small window in the door. Vaelen positioned herself at an angle where she could see through it without being obvious. Inside, Lyra's perfect composure melted away. She leaned close to Kaelith, her lips near his ear, and began to speak. Vaelen couldn't hear the words, but she could see the heart rate monitor from this angle. And as Lyra spoke, Kaelith's heart rate began to climb. 62, 68, 73, 80. Lyra kept talking, her hand resting on his chest now, right over the dragon tattoo that covered his heart. The monitor climbed higher, 85, 90. Valen's hand moved to the door handle. This was dangerous, whatever Lyra was. Saying was causing a physiological stress response. If she didn't intervene, he could go into cardiac arrest. But as she started to push the door open, Lyra straightened up. She smoothed her dress, touched her hair, and her face became a mask of perfect grief once more. The heart rate began to drop. 90, 82, 75. By the time Lyra turned to leave, it was back to 65. Normal for a resting patient. Lyra walked past Vaelen without a word, her heels clicking on the floor, leaving behind only a trace of expensive perfume and questions that had no safe answers. Vaelen waited until the footsteps faded, then slipped back inside. Kaelith lay exactly as before, motionless, eyes open and vacant. But his heart rate was still elevated. 68 now, 67. Slowly returning to baseline. She approached the bed and looked down at him, at this man who supposedly couldn't see, couldn't hear, couldn't understand anything happening around him. "What did she say to you?" Vaelen whispered, and for just a moment, so brief she almost missed it. His eyes shifted. Not randomly, not reflexively. They moved to her face, then back to the ceiling. Her pulse hammered. She pulled out her penlight again, and this time she didn't announce what she was doing. She brought it close to his right eye. The pupil contracted before the light touched it. She pulled it away. Dilation. She moved it left. His eyes tracked it. Right. They followed. This wasn't random. This wasn't reflexive. This was intentional. "You can see me," she breathed. No response, but his heart rate ticked up, just 2 beats per minute. "If you can understand me, can you make your heart rate go up?" She watched the monitor. For 5 seconds, nothing happened. Then slowly, deliberately, the number climbed. 69, 71, 74. It held there for 3 seconds, then dropped back down. That wasn't physiological. That was control. She felt dizzy. This man, this supposedly brain-dead patient, was conscious. Fully aware, trapped in a body that wouldn't respond, but aware of everything. And his wife knew something. Something that had made his heart rate spike to dangerous levels. Something that terrified him. Vaelen pulled up a chair and sat down beside the bed. "I don't know what's happening here," she said quietly, "but I'm going to figure it out. Can you blink?" She waited. Nothing. "Can you move anything? Fingers? Toes?" Nothing. The paralysis was complete. Everything except his eyes and somehow, impossibly, his autonomic nervous system. "Okay, we'll work with what we have. 1 elevated heart rate for yes, 2 quick spikes for no. Can you do that?" The monitor climbed once. Yes. Vaelen felt a chill run down her spine. She was talking to a ghost. A man everyone thought was gone, but who was screaming silently behind eyes that couldn't close. "Is someone trying to hurt you?" 1 spike? Yes. "Is it your wife?" The monitor went wild. 1 long spike that hit 90 and stayed there for 5 full seconds before dropping. That was more than yes. That was terror. Vaelen sat back, her mind racing. This changed everything. This man wasn't dying. He was being killed. Slowly, carefully, by the woman who held his medical power of attorney and visited him every night with words that caused the kind of stress response that could stop a heart. And only Vaelen knew. The question was, what could she do about it? In a hospital where she was already considered a problem, with a patient who was a known criminal, against a woman who could afford better lawyers than Vaelen could imagine. She looked at the man on the bed, at the dragons on his skin that had once symbolized power and now marked a body that was a prison. "I'm going to help you," she said. "I don't know how yet, but I'm going to help you." His heart rate spiked once. "Yes, or maybe, please." Outside, the night shift continued. Machines beeped, nurses made rounds, security guards watched hallways. And in room 9, a doctor and a criminal began a partnership that would either save his life or destroy them both. Because in that moment, neither of them knew that Lyra's whispered words had been an ultimatum. The plan was already in motion, and they had less than 72 hours before she pulled the plug for good. Vaelen stayed in room 9 long after her initial assessment should have ended. She told herself it was protocol. A new patient required thorough documentation, but the truth sat heavier in her chest. She'd just discovered a man who everyone believed was gone, and that discovery made her responsible for him in ways the hospital would never understand. She pulled her chair closer to the bed and opened her tablet, pretending to review his charts while her mind raced through impossible scenarios. How long had he been awake? Had he heard everything said in this room for 3 weeks? Every conversation between doctors who discussed his prognosis like he was already dead. Every visit from his wife? The thought made her stomach turn. "I need to know how much you can control," she said quietly, keeping her voice low enough that it wouldn't carry beyond the door. "We established heart rate. That's good. But I need more. Can you control your breathing at all?" She watched his chest rise and fall with the ventilator's rhythm. Mechanical, forced, no variation. The heart rate stayed steady, no spike. That meant no. "Okay, just the heart rate then. That's enough for now." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "I'm going to ask you questions, important ones, and I need you to be honest with me, even if the truth is terrifying." His heart rate climbed slightly. Not a yes or no, just acknowledgement, just fear. "Do you know why someone would want you dead?" One spike, yes. "Is it because of your business, the Syndicate?" 2 rapid spikes, no. Vaelen frowned. That didn't make sense. Everything she'd read about Kaelith Sol connected him to organized crime. Surely his enemies would be business-related. "Is it personal?" 1 spike, yes. "Your wife, Lyra, is she working alone?" 2 spikes, no. So there was a partner, someone else involved in whatever plot had been whispered into his ear tonight. Someone who had access to him, to this room, to the resources needed to make a murder look like mercy. "Is it someone in the hospital?" The monitor held steady for 3 long seconds. Then reluctantly, 1 spike, yes. Vaelen felt ice slide down her spine. Someone on staff. Someone who could walk these halls without question, who could access his medications, his equipment, his life support systems. Someone who could kill him and call it a complication. "Do you know who?" 1 spike, yes. She wanted to ask more, to demand names and details, but she heard footsteps in the hallway. She quickly pulled up a standard chart screen on her tablet and stood, moving to check his IV line as the door opened. Dr. Morrison stepped inside. He was the attending physician, a man in his late 50s with silver hair and the kind of confidence that came from 30 years of never being questioned. He glanced at Vaelen with barely concealed irritation. "Still here, Rho?" "Just completing the initial assessment, doctor. Wanted to be thorough." "He's vegetative. There's not much to assess." Morrison moved to the monitors, studying them with the detached interest of someone reviewing a grocery list. "Vitals are stable. Brain activity is minimal. Mrs. Sol will likely make a decision about life support within the week." Valen's blood turned cold. "A decision?" "Quality of life considerations. He's been unresponsive for 3 weeks. At some point, we have to acknowledge that keeping him on machines isn't medicine, it's prolonging the inevitable. Morrison said it so casually, like they were discussing whether to water a dead plant. She has power of attorney. It's her choice. But his brain activity is still present. There could be improvement over time. Morrison gave her a look she'd seen before, the look that said she was that doctor again, the one who cared too much, the one who couldn't accept defeat. There won't be improvement, Dr. Rho. The damage is extensive. We're not in the business of false hope. He moved toward the door, then paused. And we're certainly not in the business of prolonging the suffering of criminals. Do your rounds. Don't get attached. He left, and the silence he left behind felt suffocating. Vaelen stood frozen, staring at the door. Within the week, Lyra would make her decision within the week, and Morrison would support it. Of course he would. To him, Kaelith Sol was a bed that could be freed up. A resource drain. A monster who deserved whatever fate found him. But she'd looked into those eyes. She'd seen the awareness trapped behind them. She turned back to Kaelith and found something that stopped her heart. A single tear had escaped from the corner of his right eye, tracking slowly down his temple toward the pillow. He'd heard everything, every word about being unplugged, about his life being a choice his wife would make, about being called a monster who wasn't worth saving. Vaelen moved quickly, wiping the tear away with gentle fingers before any cameras could catch it. Evidence of consciousness. Evidence that would change everything, if anyone else saw it. I won't let them, she whispered. I don't care what Morrison says. I don't care what anyone says. You're in there, and I won't let them kill you. His heart rate spiked once. Strong, definite. Yes. Or maybe, thank you. But as she settled back into her chair for the long night ahead, one question burned. Through her mind, how do you save a man who can't move, can't speak, can't defend himself, when the people who want him dead have legal authority, hospital access, and time running out? And more terrifying still, how do you save him when you're the only person in the world who knows he needs saving? The clock on the wall read 2:17 in the morning when Vaelen made her decision. She'd spent the last 3 hours pretending to do routine checks while her mind spun through possibilities, each one more dangerous than the last. She could report what she'd discovered to Morrison. He'd dismiss it as wishful thinking, or, worse, delusion brought on by her history of over-involvement. She could go to hospital administration. They'd see liability, lawsuits, complications. They'd remove her from the case before she could finish explaining. Or she could do what every instinct screamed at her not to do. She could trust the monster in the bed. She pulled her chair close again and lowered her voice to barely a whisper. We need a better system. 1 spike for yes, 2 for no. It works, but it's limited. I need to be able to ask you complex questions. His heart rate climbed slightly. Acknowledgement. I'm going to try something. It might not work, but we have to try. She pulled out her tablet and opened a notes app. I'm going to go through the alphabet. When I hit a letter you want, spike once. We'll spell out words. It'll be slow, but it's better than nothing. She watched his heart rate. It held steady, then spiked once. Yes. Vaelen took a breath. Okay. A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Spike. G. Okay. Next letter. A, B, C, D, E, T. Spike. G, E, T. She continued, her heart pounding as letters formed into a word. Get out. Get out? She repeated. You want me to leave? 2 spikes. No. She stared at the incomplete message, then understanding crashed over her. Get out! You're not telling me to leave. You're warning me. Someone wants me out of this room. 1 spike. Yes. Who? Is it Morrison? 2 spikes. No. Lyra? 1 spike. Yes. Vaelen felt her mouth go dry. She's going to try to move me off your case. 1 spike. When? She watched as he painstakingly spelled it out, letter by agonizing letter. S-O-O-N. Soon. Whatever Lyra's plan was, it required Vaelen gone. Which meant Vaelen was the obstacle, the only person who knew Kaelith was conscious, the only person standing between him and whatever method they'd chosen to finish what the bomb had started. I need to know more, Vaelen said, her voice urgent now. About who's helping her. You said someone in the hospital. I need a name. But before Kaelith could respond, the door opened without warning. Valen's head snapped up. A man in surgical scrubs stood in the doorway. Not a doctor, a technician, based on the ID badge clipped to his pocket. He was younger than her, maybe late 20s, with the kind of bland features that made him instantly forgettable. Dr. Rho, he said, his voice friendly. Sorry to interrupt. I'm here to check the ventilator calibration, standard maintenance. Everything about him was normal. Everything about this should have been routine. But Valen's instincts, honed by years of night shifts and emergency rooms, screamed that something was wrong. At 2:30 in the morning, she asked. Equipment doesn't keep business hours. He smiled, already moving toward the machines. It'll just take a minute. You can step out if you want. I'll stay. His smile never wavered, but something flickered in his eyes. Annoyance or calculation? Suit yourself. Vaelen watched as he approached the ventilator, pulling a small toolkit from his pocket. Her eyes flicked to Kaelith's monitor. His heart rate was climbing, 70, 75, 80. The technician noticed. Vital spiking. That's unusual for a vegetative patient. Stress response, Vaelen said quickly. Sometimes happens when there's movement in the room. Huh. Interesting. He turned back to the ventilator and Vaelen saw it. His hand moved not to the calibration panel, but to the oxygen mix controls, the settings that determined how much air Kaelith received with each mechanical breath. Kaelith's heart rate hit 90, 95. What are you adjusting? Vaelen asked, standing up. Just the flow rate, standard protocol. The flow rate was adjusted yesterday. I saw it in the chart. The technician's hand paused. When he turned to face her, that friendly smile was still there, but his eyes had gone cold. You're very thorough, Dr. Rho. That's my job. They stood there, 3 feet apart, and Vaelen realized she'd just walked into something she didn't fully understand. This man wasn't here for maintenance. He was here because someone had sent him. Someone who knew Vaelen would be alone with Kaelith. Someone who wanted to make an adjustment that would look like equipment failure. Step away from the ventilator, Vaelen said, her voice steady, despite the fear racing through her veins. Or what? You'll call security. He gestured to the door. They're on break. Funny how that happened right before I needed to be here. Kaelith's heart rate hit 100. The monitor's alarm began to beep. The technician's hand moved back toward the controls. Vaelen didn't think. She grabbed the first thing within reach, a metal tray of medical supplies, and swung it hard. It connected with his wrist with a sharp crack. He yelped, jerking back, and she followed through, pressing the call button on Kaelith's bed rail 3 times fast. Emergency code. You're making a mistake, the technician said, cradling his wrist. You have no idea who you're dealing with? I know exactly who I'm dealing with. Someone who just tried to murder my patient. Footsteps pounded down the hallway. The technician looked toward the door, then back at Vaelen, his expression hardening. This isn't over. He bolted just as 2 nurses burst into the room. What happened? One of them demanded. Valen's mind raced. If she told the truth, they'd think she was paranoid. They'd pull her off the case, maybe suspend her, and Kaelith would be left unprotected, waiting for the next attempt. False alarm, she said, forcing her voice calm. Sorry, thought I saw a medication error. My mistake. The nurses exchanged glances, the kind that said they'd already heard about the doctor who cared too much. They left without another word, and Vaelen locked the door behind them, her hands shaking. She turned back to Kaelith. His heart rate was slowly dropping. 100, 90, 85. That was him, wasn't it? She whispered. The person in the hospital, the one helping Lyra. 1 spike. Yes. And I just stopped their first attempt. 1 spike. Vaelen sank into her chair, the weight of what had just happened crushing down on her. She'd saved his life tonight. But she'd also declared war on people who had resources, access, and a plan that had been weeks in the making. How many more attempts would there be? How many could she stop before one succeeded? And how long before they realized the easiest way to kill Kaelith Sol was to eliminate the one person protecting him? Dawn broke gray and cold over Crescent Bay, but Vaelen didn't notice. She hadn't left room 9 all night. Her shift had ended 2 hours ago, but the thought of leaving Kaelith unprotected made her chest tight with panic. She'd filed a formal incident report about the technician, carefully worded to sound like a misunderstanding rather than an attempted murder, but she knew the truth. They'd tried once. They would try again. "You should go home," came a voice from the doorway. Vaelen turned to find Patricia, the head nurse, watching her with an expression caught somewhere between concern and resignation. "I'm fine," Vaelen said. "You look exhausted. And Dr. Morrison asked me to remind you about professional boundaries." Patricia stepped into the room, lowering her voice. "I know you think you can save everyone, Vaelen, but this one's already gone. The sooner you accept that, the easier it'll be." Vaelen wanted to scream the truth, to grab Patricia by the shoulders and force her to look at Kaelith's eyes, to see what she saw, but that would only get her removed faster. "I'll leave soon," she lied. Patricia sighed and left, and Vaelen was alone with Kaelith again. Alone with a secret that grew heavier by the hour. She checked his vitals, all stable. Then she pulled out her tablet and began searching for information she probably shouldn't be looking for. Articles about the Azure Syndicate, police reports, anything that would help her understand who Kaelith Sol really was. What she found made her stomach turn. Money laundering, suspected arms trafficking. 3 attempted prosecutions, all dismissed due to lack of evidence or witnesses who suddenly refused to testify. One article showed a photo of him leaving a courthouse, his expression cold enough to freeze blood. The caption called him untouchable. "You've hurt people," Vaelen said quietly, not sure why she felt the need to say it out loud. "A lot of people, probably." His heart rate stayed steady. No denial, no justification. "Does that mean you deserve to be murdered in a hospital bed?" 2 spikes. No. She looked at him. This man who'd built an empire on fear and violence, now reduced to someone who could only communicate through a beeping monitor. There was something almost poetic about it. The powerful, made powerless. The untouchable, completely vulnerable. But what did it say about her that she was willing to risk everything to protect him anyway? Before she could spiral further into that question, she heard voices outside the door. Multiple people. One of them was definitely Lyra. Vaelen quickly closed the articles on her tablet and stood, smoothing her coat, trying to look professional instead of like someone who'd been awake for 16 hours and stopped an assassination attempt. The door opened and Lyra swept in like she owned the room. She probably did, in the ways that mattered. Behind her came 2 men in expensive suits, a woman with a tablet who looked like an assistant, and Dr. Morrison. "Dr. Rho," Morrison said, his voice clipped. "You're still here?" "Just finishing my notes." "Well, finish them elsewhere. Mrs. Sol has requested privacy for a family meeting." Valen's blood went cold. A family meeting, in a hospital, that phrase usually meant one thing: end-of-life decisions. She glanced at Kaelith. His heart rate was climbing, slowly, steadily, 70, 75. "Of course," Vaelen said, but she didn't move toward the door. "Will there be any changes to his care plan I should be aware of?" Lyra turned those cold, beautiful eyes on her. "That's really not your concern, Doctor. You're just the night shift supervisor." The dismissal was absolute, the kind that came from someone used to people obeying without question. But Vaelen had stopped obeying a long time ago. "Actually, any changes to a patient's care plan require the attending physician's signature and notification of all medical staff. It's hospital policy." She kept her voice professional, but her meaning was clear. "I'm watching. I'm documenting. Try something." Morrison's expression darkened. "Dr. Rho, you're dismissed." 85, 90. "I'd like to stay for the meeting, as part of the medical team." "Now, Dr. Rho." She had no choice. Refusing a direct order from an attending would get her suspended immediately. She gathered her tablet and moved toward the door, but as she passed Kaelith's bed, she let her hand brush against his. just for a second, of promise. I'm not abandoning you. His heart rate spiked hard. Once? Yes, or maybe, please don't leave me. She stepped into the hallway, and one of the security guards closed the door firmly behind her. Through the small window, she could see Lyra settling into the chair beside Kaelith's bed, her hand resting on his chest with practiced tenderness. The two men in suits flanked her. Morrison stood at the foot of the bed, reviewing something on his tablet. Vaelen couldn't hear what they were saying, but she could see the monitor. Kaelith's heart rate was at 95 and climbing. One of the suited men gestured to the IV line. Morrison nodded. They were discussing medication, something about dosage, something about comfort care, something that made Lyra smile just slightly. 100. Valen's hand moved to her phone. She didn't know who she could call, but she started recording through the window, capturing everything she could see, even if she couldn't hear the words. Lyra leaned close to Kaelith, her lips near his ear, and began speaking. The performance of a grieving wife saying goodbye to her husband. But Vaelen saw what the others didn't. The way Lyra's hand pressed just slightly harder on Kaelith's chest. The way her smile never quite reached her eyes. The way she glanced at the clock on the wall like she was waiting for something. 110. One of the suited men said something that made everyone in the room laugh. Everyone except Kaelith, of course, who couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't defend himself while they planned his death 3 feet away. Morrison pulled out a syringe. Valen's breath stopped. She watched as he connected it to the IV port, as Lyra signed something on his tablet, as the assistant timestamped the document. Everything legal, everything documented, everything designed to look like mercy instead of murder. Morrison pushed the plunger halfway down, and Vaelen realized with crystal clarity that she was about to watch a man die. Not quickly, not dramatically, but slowly, peacefully, while everyone in that room smiled and called it kindness. She had maybe 3 minutes to decide if she was willing to destroy her career, risk legal action, and make enemies of people who could ruin her life. 3 minutes to choose between the oath she'd taken and the reality of what that oath meant when the patient was a monster and the murderers wore white coats and wedding rings. What would you have done? Vaelen burst through the door without knocking. She didn't care about protocol anymore. She didn't care about Morrison's authority or Lyra's money or the consequences that would come later. All she cared about was the syringe in Morrison's hand and the man who couldn't scream for help. "Stop," she said, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. Everyone turned. Morrison's finger was still on the plunger, halfway through the injection. "Dr. Rho, I told you to leave," Morrison said, his voice low and dangerous. "What's in that syringe?" "Sedative, to keep him comfortable." "At that dosage, that's not sedation. That's respiratory suppression." Vaelen moved closer, her eyes locked on the medication. "You're killing him." The room went silent. Lyra stood slowly, her expression shifting from surprise to cold calculation. "How dare you?" Lyra said softly. "My husband is suffering. Dr. Morrison is helping him transition peacefully." "Transition? That's what we're calling murder now?" Morrison's face flushed red. "That's enough, Dr. Rho. Security!" But Vaelen had already hit the emergency call button on the wall. The one that brought more than just security. The one that triggered a medical emergency response and required documentation of everything happening in this room. "You can explain to the board why you administered a lethal dose of sedative without proper protocols," Vaelen said. "I'm sure they'll be very interested." She was bluffing. The dose might not be lethal. It might be exactly what Morrison claimed. But doubt was a weapon, and she'd just deployed it. Morrison hesitated. His finger lifted slightly from the plunger, and in that moment of hesitation, footsteps thundered down the hallway. 2 nurses and a hospital administrator appeared in the doorway. "What's the emergency?" the administrator demanded. Vaelen had seconds to make this work. "Potential medication error. I need a second verification on the dosage Dr. Morrison was about to administer." The administrator's eyes narrowed. She moved to Morrison's side and checked the syringe, then the chart, then the syringe again. "This is 3 times the standard dosage." For comfort care in end-of-life situations, it's appropriate, Morrison said, but his voice had lost its certainty. Not without ethics committee approval, it's not. The administrator took the syringe from his hand. I need to see the signed DNR and the ethics consultation before we proceed. Lyra's mask cracked. Just for a second, just long enough for Vaelen to see the fury burning underneath. This is harassment. My husband is dying, and you're making his final hours a bureaucratic nightmare. I'm following hospital protocol, Mrs. Sol. The administrator turned to Morrison. My office. Now. Morrison left without looking at Vaelen, but the hatred in his eyes said everything. She'd just made an enemy who had the power to end her career with a phone call. The suited men ushered Lyra out, both of them whispering urgently into their phones. The room emptied in less than a minute, leaving Vaelen alone with Kaelith and the steady beep of his heart monitor. She waited until the footsteps faded completely, then locked the door and sagged against it, her legs suddenly too weak to hold her. That was stupid, she whispered. That was so incredibly stupid. Kaelith's heart rate spiked once. She looked up and saw something that made her breath catch. His eyes had moved, not randomly, not reflexively. They were locked on her face with an intensity that pierced straight through her. You're welcome, she said, trying to smile through the fear that was making her hand shake. But we both know I just bought you maybe a day. 2 at most. They'll find another way. 1 spike. Yes. She pushed off the door and moved to his bedside, sinking into the chair that Lyra had occupied minutes before. I need more information about who's helping her, about why they want you dead. About everything. She pulled out her tablet. We're going to spend the next few hours getting answers, and I don't care if it's forbidden or dangerous or if it gets me fired. You're going to tell me everything. For the next hour, they developed a system. She'd pull up documents, articles, photos on her tablet. She'd move the screen slowly across his field of vision, and he'd spike his heart rate when something was relevant. She showed him security footage from the hospital hallways. His heart rate jumped when the fake technician appeared on screen. She showed him photos of hospital staff. Another spike when she reached a nurse named David Chen, who worked the day shift. Chen, he's involved? 1 spike. Yes. She kept going. Financial records she probably shouldn't have accessed. Syndicate files from police databases, names and faces of people in Kaelith's organization. And slowly, painfully, a picture began to form. Lyra hadn't been working with a rival gang. She'd been working with someone inside the syndicate itself. Someone who wanted Kaelith's position. Someone who'd orchestrated the car bomb and was now finishing the job through legal means. Thorne, Vaelen said, reading the name off a file. Marcus Thorne, second in command of the Azure Syndicate. The monitor went wild. Multiple spikes. Yes, yes, yes. He's the one, and he's using Lyra to legitimize the kill. 1 spike. Vaelen sat back, processing. This wasn't just murder. This was a coup. And she'd just inserted herself directly into the middle of a gang war. You know what the smart thing to do is, she said quietly. Walk away. Let them have you. Save myself. 2 spikes. No. But his heart rate stayed elevated. Fear, maybe. Or maybe something else. Why should I help you? She asked. Give me one good reason. She didn't expect an answer to that. He couldn't spell out complex ideas. Fast enough. But she watched his eyes, those dark eyes that had seen terrible things and done worse. And she saw something she hadn't expected. Desperation. Pure, raw desperation. Not the desperation of a criminal who wanted to survive to hurt more people, but the desperation of a human being who'd been betrayed by everyone he trusted and had nowhere left to turn except to a doctor who'd been exiled to the night shift for caring too much. She understood that desperation. She'd felt it herself, standing in front of hospital review boards, trying to explain why she'd fought so hard for patients no one else believed in, trying to make them see that the capacity to care wasn't a weakness. Maybe that was why she couldn't walk away, because in some twisted way, she and Kaelith Sol were the same. Two people the world had decided weren't worth saving, left in a room together with nothing but each other. "Okay," she said finally. "We do this together, but you need to trust me, and I need to trust you. Can you do that?" His heart rate spiked once. Strong and clear. Yes. And as dawn light began to filter through the blinds, Vaelen made a decision that would either save them both or destroy them completely. She was going to war with the Azure Syndicate, and her only weapon was a man who couldn't move. How do you fight monsters when you can't even lift your hand? Vaelen knew she had maybe 12 hours before Morrison found a way to remove her from Kaelith's case permanently. 12 hours to gather enough evidence to prove what was happening. 12 hours to turn a heart rate monitor into testimony that could save a man's life. She'd gone home for 3 hours, showered, changed, tried to eat something that tasted like cardboard. The whole time, her phone sat on the counter, waiting for the call that would tell her she'd been suspended. But the call never came. When she returned to the hospital at 8 p.m., the evening shift nurse gave her a strange look. "Thought you'd be done with room 9, the nurse said. "Why would I be done?" "Morrison requested a transfer, said you were too emotionally involved, but administration blocked it, something about needing continuity of care during the ethics review." Vaelen felt relief flood through her. The ethics review she'd triggered by questioning the medication dosage had bought her time. Not much, but enough. She made her way to room 9, nodding to the security guards who'd started to recognize her. Inside, Kaelith lay exactly as she'd left him. Motionless, silent, waiting. "I'm back," she said softly, settling into what had become her chair. "And we've got work to do." His heart rate spiked once. She smiled despite everything. For the next 2 hours, they continued their strange communication. She'd hacked into hospital systems she definitely shouldn't have access to. Pulling up personnel files, security logs, anything that might help them identify who else was involved in the plot. David Chen, the day shift nurse, had received 3 large deposits in the past month. Each one came 2 days after he'd worked Kaelith's room alone. The fake technician's name was Jason Webb. He didn't work for the hospital. He worked for a medical equipment company that the Azure Syndicate owned. And Lyra. Vaelen pulled up Lyra's phone records, obtained through methods that would probably get her arrested if anyone found out. In the past 3 weeks, Lyra had called one number more than any other. A number registered to Marcus Thorne. "They're not even hiding it," Vaelen muttered. "They think you can't tell anyone. They think they're safe." One spike. Yes. "But you can tell someone. You're telling me." She looked at him, this man who'd built an empire on violence, now reduced to one-word answers through a medical device. There was something profound about it. The powerful learning what it meant to be powerless. The man who'd never needed anyone, now completely dependent on someone he barely knew. "When you recover," she said, then stopped herself. "If you recover. What happens to the people who did this to you?" She didn't expect him to answer. It wasn't a yes or no question. But his heart rate climbed steadily. Not spiking, just rising. Higher and higher until the monitor's alarm began to beep. She understood. It wasn't an answer. It was a promise. A promise written in heartbeats and rage. "That's what I thought," she said, silencing the alarm. At 10 p.m., the door opened. Vaelen looked up, expecting the night shift nurse. Instead, she saw Jason Webb, the fake technician, the man who'd tried to tamper with the ventilator. He froze when he saw her. "I thought you weren't working tonight." "Change of plans." Vaelen stood slowly, positioning herself between Webb and Kaelith's bed. "What are you doing here?" "Equipment check. The ventilator's been showing error codes." "No, it hasn't. I've been monitoring it all evening." Webb's expression hardened. He was bigger than her, stronger, and there was something in his eyes that said he'd done worse things than whatever he was planning now. "Look, Dr. Rho, you seem like a nice person. Smart. You've got your whole career ahead of you." He took a step forward. "Walk away, just for 10 minutes. That's all I need. Not happening. They're paying me $50,000 to make sure this man doesn't wake up. You think I'm going to let one stubborn doctor ruin that? Vaelen's hand moved to the medication cart beside her. Her fingers found a syringe of sedative, not enough to kill, but enough to stop someone long enough to call for help. Last chance, Webb said, pulling something from his pocket. A syringe of his own. This is concentrated. Potassium chloride. 1 injection. His heart stops in 30 seconds. Looks like natural cardiac arrest in a trauma patient. No one will question it. Kaelith's heart rate hit 120. Pure terror translated into beeps. You'll have to go through me, Vaelen said. Webb smiled. Okay. He lunged. Vaelen was ready. She'd spent years in emergency rooms dealing with violent patients and desperate addicts. She knew how to move, how to use someone's momentum against them. She sidestepped, swinging the sedative syringe in an arc that connected with his neck. The needle went in. She pushed the plunger. 3 milliliters of midazolam flooded his system. Webb stumbled, his eyes going wide. What did you? Enough to put you down for 6 hours. Vaelen grabbed her phone, fingers shaking as she dialed security. Enjoy your nap. He collapsed before she finished the call, just crumpled like a puppet with cut strings, the syringe of potassium, chloride rolling across the floor. Security arrived in 90 seconds, then hospital administration, then finally police. Vaelen showed them everything, the potassium chloride, the fake credentials, the way Webb had gained access to a high-security ward. And as officers led the unconscious man away in handcuffs, the administrator turned to her. Dr. Rho, you may have just saved this patient's life. May have? Vaelen looked at Kaelith, whose heart rate was slowly returning to normal. He definitely tried to kill him. We'll need your statement. Full investigation. This is going to get complicated. Complicated didn't begin to cover it. By midnight, Vaelen had given her statement 3 times to 3 different people. Hospital lawyers appeared, police detectives, even a representative from the district attorney's office, asking questions about the Azure Syndicate and Marcus Thorne and what exactly Vaelen knew about organized crime. She told them nothing about Kaelith being conscious. If they knew, they'd move him. They'd separate them, and then he'd be alone again, trapped with no way to warn anyone about the next attempt, because there would be a next attempt. When everyone finally left, Vaelen locked the door and returned to Kaelith's side. She was exhausted, terrified, running on nothing but adrenaline and coffee. That's 2 attempts we've stopped, she said. How many more are coming? She didn't expect an answer, but his heart rate spiked. Once, twice, 3 times, 4 times. 4 more attempts. 4 more times she'd have to be faster, smarter, more willing to cross lines she'd never imagined crossing. I can't stop. 4 more attempts, she whispered. I'm one person. I'm just a doctor. His eyes moved, found hers, held them with an intensity that made her breath catch. And his heart rate began to spell something. Not words this time. A pattern. A rhythm that felt almost like Morse code, if Morse code was written in heartbeats. She grabbed her tablet, recording the pattern. Fast spike, slow spike, fast, fast, slow. It took her 10 minutes to decode it. When she did, she felt something shift in her chest. Not alone. The pattern spelled out, over and over, not alone. She looked at him, this criminal, this monster, this man who was promising her with nothing but a heart rate monitor that she wasn't fighting alone anymore. And for the first time since this nightmare began, Vaelen let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, they had a chance. But believing they had a chance meant accepting what came next. It meant accepting that to save his life, she might have to help him destroy the people trying to kill him. And could she live with that? If your heart is racing right now, if you need to know what happens next, hit that like button and subscribe. Because I can see you watching. But if you don't, engage. YouTube thinks you don't care and stops showing you stories like this. Don't rob yourself of the ending. Like, subscribe. 3 seconds. Do it now. The Arrest of Jason Webb changed everything and nothing. Security increased around room 9. Police posted guards. The district attorney opened an investigation into the Azure Syndicate. But Vaelen knew it wasn't enough. Webb was a hired hand. The real threat still walked free, wearing expensive suits and a grieving widow's mask. It was 3 a.m. when Vaelen noticed the first miracle. She'd been reviewing Kaelith's neurological assessments, comparing them to the initial scans from 3 weeks ago. The swelling in his brain had decreased. Not dramatically, but enough that new pathways might be forming. Enough that recovery, real recovery, wasn't impossible anymore. "Your brain is healing," she told him, unable to keep the wonder from her voice. "Slowly, but it's healing." His heart rate spiked once. Yes, but there was something else in the pattern, something that felt like hope. She moved to check his reflexes, a routine test she performed every few hours, lifted his right hand, pressed a finger against his palm to test for involuntary muscle response, and felt something that made her freeze. His fingers twitched, not a reflex, not a random nerve firing. His fingers closed slightly around hers, then released. "Oh my God," she breathed. "Did you just do that again?" She pressed her finger to his palm. His fingers closed. Weak, barely there, but intentional. Tears stung her eyes. She didn't know why she was crying. This was good news. This was progress. But something about feeling his hand move after weeks of paralysis broke something open inside her. "You're coming back," she whispered. "You're actually coming back." One spike. Yes. She sat down hard, still holding his hand, and for the first time really looked at the tattoos that covered his skin. She'd seen them before, of course. Impossible not to notice the dragons that coiled from his chest down both arms. But she'd never really examined them, never tried to understand what they meant. "These dragons," she said, tracing one lightly with her finger. "They're beautiful, traditional Korean style, right?" One spike. "Do they mean something beyond just decoration?" One spike. Yes. She pulled out her tablet. "Show me, I'll pull up information. You tell me when I'm close." She searched through articles about Korean dragon mythology. When she reached a passage about dragons representing protection and strength, his heart rate jumped. "Protection," she read further. "Dragons that guard what matters most." Another spike. "What were you protecting?" She didn't expect him to be able to answer that, but his eyes moved, slowly, deliberately, down to his chest, to the center of the dragon design, where one small detail stood out from the rest. A date, inked in delicate numbers, over his heart. "A date," she said, zooming in with her tablet's camera to read it clearly. "October 15th, 2012. What happened that day?" His heart rate climbed, not in the pattern for yes or no, just climbing, the way it did when emotion overwhelmed the code they'd built. She searched the date with his name, found a news article that made her stomach turn. Kaelith Sol's younger sister killed in gang violence. Collateral damage in a territory dispute. She was 16. The monitor kept climbing. 80, 90, 100. "The dragons aren't about you," Vaelen said softly. "They're about her. You're protecting her memory." One spike, strong enough to make the whole line jump. She looked at him with new eyes. At this man who'd built an empire of violence, who'd hurt countless people, who'd become exactly the kind of monster that had killed his sister. And she understood something about trauma she'd only read about in textbooks, how pain could calcify into rage, how loss could transform into power, how a 16-year-old boy who couldn't protect his sister could become a 34-year-old man who controlled an empire through fear. "Is that why you did it?" she asked. "Built the syndicate to make sure you'd never be powerless again?" The monitor held steady for a long moment. Then, one spike. "Yes." "And now you're powerless anyway." "Two spikes." "No," she frowned. "How are you not powerless? You can barely move your fingers." His eyes shifted to her face, held there, and his fingers tightened around hers again, stronger this time. The message was clear. He wasn't powerless because he had her. "That's a lot of faith to put in someone you just met." she said, but her voice was shaking. I'm not a fighter. I'm not part of your world. I'm just a doctor who couldn't let you die. His heart rate spelled out the pattern again. Not alone. Not alone. Not alone. She wiped her eyes with her free hand, annoyed at herself for crying. Tell me about the other tattoos. What do they mean? Over the next hour, in fragments and heart rate spikes, he told her stories, written in ink. The tiger on his left shoulder represented his first real victory in the Syndicate. The phoenix rising from flames on his back symbolized rebuilding after a betrayal. Each mark was a scar turned into art. Each one carried weight. You've lived 100 lives, she said, all of them violent. One spike. Do you regret it? The monitor went quiet. No spikes, just steady beats. And she realized that was an answer too. Regret was too simple for someone like him. Too clean. He'd made choices that destroyed lives, built on top of his sister's grave. And now those choices had led him here. Trapped, betrayed, dying by inches. When you get out of this bed, she said carefully, what happens? To Thorn? To Lyra? To everyone who tried to kill you? His heart rate climbed again, higher than before, and his fingers, those fingers that were just learning to move again, tightened around hers with enough force that she felt it. That's what I thought, she murmured. But here was the truth she couldn't avoid anymore. She was helping a man who would absolutely kill the people who'd tried to murder him, who would probably kill others in the process, who would return to being exactly what he'd been before the bomb, a monster. And yet, sitting here in the darkness, holding his hand while he fought his way back from the edge of death, she couldn't bring herself to let go. Maybe that made her a monster too. Or maybe it just made her human. Someone who'd seen past the ink and the reputation and the violence to the terrified man underneath. The one who'd lost his sister and built walls of power so high, he'd forgotten what it felt like to trust anyone. We're quite a pair, she said. The doctor who cares too much and the gangster who can't die. If we survive this, they should write a book about us. One spike. Then after a pause, something that might have been his version of laughter, a quick flutter of heartbeats that sounded almost like humor. She smiled despite everything, despite the danger, despite the impossible situation, despite knowing that every moment she spent in this room bound her tighter to a man whose world would destroy her if she wasn't careful. But careful had never been Vaelen's strength. And as his fingers relaxed in hers and his heart rate settled into a peaceful rhythm, she realized something terrifying. She wasn't just trying to save his life anymore. She was starting to care what happened to him after. And that changed everything. Vaelen was reviewing Kaelith's progress notes when her phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. Lyra Sol just arrived with 4 lawyers. They're heading to Morrison's office. Thought you should know. Her blood turned to ice. 4 lawyers, not 1. 4. That wasn't a consultation. That was a declaration of war. She looked at Kaelith. His eyes were already on her, and even through the paralysis, she could see the fear. He knew what was coming. They're going to try again, she said. Legally this time. 1 spike, yes. I don't know if I can stop them, if she has power of attorney and Morrison supports her decision. 2 spikes, no. But his heart rate was climbing, not the controlled spikes of their communication. This was panic, raw and unfiltered. Listen to me. Vaelen gripped his hand. You're getting stronger. Your fingers move. Your brain is healing. We just need more time. But time was the one thing they didn't have. 30 minutes later, Morrison appeared in the doorway. His expression was carefully neutral, but Vaelen saw the satisfaction underneath. Dr. Rho, conference room. Now! I'm in the middle of patient care. Now, doctor. She had no choice. She followed him down the sterile hallway to a conference room she'd never been in before, the kind reserved for families making impossible decisions. Inside, Lyra sat at the head of the table like a queen holding court. 4 lawyers flanked her, their briefcases open, documents spread across the polished wood. And next to Lyra, looking perfectly comfortable, sat Marcus Thorne. Vaelen recognized him from the files she'd pulled. Second in command of the Azure Syndicate, the man orchestrating everything. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe 40, handsome in a cold, calculated way. He smiled at her like they were old friends. "Dr. Rho, we've heard so much about your dedication to my dear friend Kaelith." "Friend." The word was poison wrapped in silk. "Sit down, please," Lyra said. It wasn't a request. Vaelen sat, her mind racing through every possible defense, every argument she could make. Morrison took the seat beside Lyra, a united front. One of the lawyers, a woman with silver hair and eyes like a shark, slid a document across the table. "This is a do not resuscitate order combined with a request to withdraw life support. Mrs. Sol, as the patient's wife and designated healthcare proxy, has the legal authority to make this decision." "He's improving," Vaelen said. "His brain swelling has decreased. There are signs of neurological recovery." "Dr. Morrison's assessment disagrees," the lawyer said smoothly. "According to his most recent evaluation, the patient remains in a persistent vegetative state with no meaningful brain activity and no realistic hope of recovery." Vaelen turned to Morrison. "You know that's not true. The scans show minimal improvement that doesn't change the prognosis." Morrison's voice was flat, final. 3 weeks of intensive care with no consciousness. No response to stimuli. Mrs. Sol has every right to make this difficult decision. Lyra dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. The performance was flawless. "I can't watch him suffer anymore. My husband was a proud man, a strong man. He wouldn't want to exist like this." "How do you know what he'd want?" Vaelen demanded. "Have you asked him?" The room went silent. Thorne leaned forward slightly, his eyes sharp. "Asked him? He's vegetative, Dr. Rho. Or are you suggesting something else?" Valen's heart hammered. This was the moment she could tell them the truth. That Kaelith was conscious. That he could communicate. That he was terrified of the woman sitting at this table planning his death. But if she told them, they'd demand proof. They'd run tests. They'd move him to a different facility where she couldn't protect him. And worst of all, if Thorne knew Kaelith was aware, he'd find a way to kill him before the truth could come out. "I'm suggesting," Vaelen said carefully, "that withdrawing life support from a patient showing signs of improvement is premature and potentially negligent." "Your opinion is noted," the lawyer said. "However, it doesn't supersede the legal rights of the healthcare proxy. Mrs. Sol has made her decision. We're simply here to ensure the hospital honors it." "When?" Vaelen asked, her voice hollow. "Tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. Dr. Morrison will remove the ventilator and discontinue all life-sustaining treatments. Mr. Sol will be made comfortable during the transition." "Comfortable. That's what they called it when they killed you slowly enough that no one could prove it was murder." "I need to be present," Vaelen said. "That won't be necessary," Morrison said. "In fact, given your emotional involvement, it would be inappropriate. I'm his doctor. You're a night shift supervisor who's developed an unhealthy attachment to a criminal." Morrison's mask slipped just enough for her to see the contempt underneath. "You're also no longer assigned to this case. Effective immediately." The room tilted. "You can't." "I can, and I have. Security will escort you out if necessary." Lyra stood, smoothing her black dress. "Thank you all for your time. Tomorrow morning my husband will finally be at peace." She left, Thorne and the lawyers following like an entourage. Morrison stayed long enough to give Vaelen one final look. "Go home, Dr. Rho. It's over." But as Vaelen sat alone in that conference room, documents authorizing a murder spread across the table in front of her, she knew it wasn't over. Not even close. She had 14 hours. 14 hours to find a way to prove Kaelith was conscious. 14 hours to stop a legal execution. 14 hours to save a man who'd spent his whole life hurting people and now had no one left to save him, but a doctor the world had already decided was too damaged to trust. She pulled out her phone and did something she'd never thought she'd do. She called the one person who might actually be able to help. A lawyer she'd met years ago during a medical malpractice case. Someone who specialized in impossible situations and didn't ask too many questions about why. The phone rang 3 times before a gravelly voice answered. "This is Chen. It's 4 in the morning. Someone better be dying." "They will be," Vaelen said. "Unless you can stop it. I need help, the kind that might get both of us disbarred and arrested." There was a pause, then a dry laugh. "Now you've got my attention. Talk." As Vaelen explained the situation, walking back toward room 9 despite Morrison's orders, she realized something profound. She'd spent her whole career following rules, playing by the system's guidelines, believing that if she just worked hard, enough and cared enough, she could save people within the boundaries of what was legal and proper. But some people couldn't be saved by rules. Some battles couldn't be won by being good. And sometimes the only way to stop monsters was to become something just as ruthless. The question was, could she live with who she'd have to become? And more importantly, did she have a choice? Vaelen spent the next 12 hours building the impossible. Chen, the lawyer, arrived at 6 a.m. with a briefcase full of legal precedents and a willingness to fight that matched her own desperation. Together, they crafted an emergency petition for a court-appointed guardian, a request for independent neurological assessment, every legal tool they could find to buy even one more day. But they both knew the truth. The law moved slowly. Death moved fast. And by the time any judge reviewed their paperwork, Kaelith would already be gone. "We need proof. He's conscious," Chen said, pacing the small consultation room they'd commandeered. "Not just your word, not just heart rate fluctuations that could be explained as reflexes. We need him to demonstrate clear, undeniable awareness." "He can't move," Vaelen said. "Just his fingers barely. His eyes track, but they'd argue that's reflexive, too." "Then we're screwed." Chen stopped pacing. "Unless he wakes up in the next hour and gives a full statement, which we both know isn't happening." Vaelen looked at the clock. 7:30 a.m. 30 minutes until Morrison would walk into room 9 and begin the process of removing the ventilator. 30 minutes until Lyra won. "I need to be there," she said. "Morrison banned you from the room." "I don't care." Chen studied her for a long moment. "You know this might destroy your career even if we win." "I know. And if we lose, you'll have thrown everything away for nothing." Vaelen thought about Kaelith, about the way his fingers had tightened around hers, about the stories written in his tattoos, about a 16-year-old boy who'd lost his sister and built walls so high he'd forgotten what trust felt like, about a man trapped in his own body, screaming silently while the world prepared to let him die. "It won't be for nothing," she said. They walked to room 9 together. Security tried to stop them. Chen flashed his Bar Association credentials and threatened lawsuits until they backed down. Morrison was already there, standing beside the bed with Lyra and Thorne. The lawyers had stayed away, probably to maintain plausible deniability. "Dr. Rho," Morrison said, his voice tight with fury. "You were ordered to stay away." "I'm filing an emergency injunction to stop this procedure," Chen announced, stepping forward. "On the grounds that the patient may be conscious and unable to consent to withdrawal of care." Lyra's perfect composure cracked. "This is harassment. My husband is dying and you're turning it into a circus." "Then let's prove it," Vaelen said. "Give me 5 minutes to demonstrate consciousness. If I can't, I'll leave and never contest this again." Morrison laughed. 5 minutes to produce a miracle? Dr. Rho, your delusions have reached. "I'll allow it," Thorne said suddenly. Everyone turned to look at him. He was smiling, but his eyes were calculating. "Let Dr. Rho have her 5 minutes. When she fails, there will be no more delays. No more questions." He was confident, absolutely certain that Kaelith couldn't respond, that whatever evidence Vaelen thought she had would crumble under scrutiny. "Fine," Morrison said. 5 minutes, starting now." Vaelen moved to Kaelith's bedside. His eyes found hers immediately, and she saw the question there. "Can you save me? Or is this goodbye?" "Kaelith," she said clearly, loud enough for everyone to hear. "If you can understand me, I need you to show them. Move your hand, blink twice, anything. Nothing. His hand lay motionless. His eyes stared without blinking. "See?" Lyra said softly. "There's nothing there. Just a body being kept alive by machines." Vaelen's heart sank. She'd been so sure, so absolutely certain that he'd be able to. Wait, his heart rate. It was climbing, slowly, deliberately, spelling out the pattern they'd developed. Not yet. The rhythm said, not yet. He was waiting. But for what? 2 minutes, Morrison announced. Vaelen leaned closer, lowering her voice so only Kaelith could hear. "What are you waiting for? You need to show them now." His eyes shifted, not to her, to Lyra. And suddenly Vaelen understood. He wasn't just trying to prove consciousness. He was waiting for the perfect moment, the moment that would hurt the most. "Kaelith, please," she whispered. "I can't hold them off much longer." 1 minute, Morrison said. Lyra moved to the other side of the bed, reaching out to touch Kaelith's face with manufactured tenderness. "It's okay, my love. It's time to let go. I'll take care of everything. You don't have to fight anymore." And that's when it happened. Kaelith's hand moved, not a twitch, not a tremor. His entire hand lifted off the bed, fingers curling into a fist and then opened again. Deliberate, undeniable, conscious. The room went silent. "Oh my God," Chen breathed. Morrison stumbled backward. "That's not possible. The damage to his motor cortex." But Kaelith wasn't finished. His hand moved again, this time reaching for Lyra's wrist. His fingers closed around it with enough strength that she gasped and tried to pull away. He held on. "He's awake," Vaelen said, her voice shaking. "He's been awake." And then, for the first time in 3 weeks, Kaelith Sol spoke. His voice was rough, broken, from disuse, barely more than a whisper. But everyone in that room heard it. Everyone in that room would never forget it. Lyra, just her name, just one word. But it carried 3 weeks of rage, betrayal, and promises of retribution. It carried the weight of a man who'd heard every whispered plot, every casual discussion of his murder, every moment they'd thought he couldn't hear. Lyra's face went white. No, you can't be." "Awake," Kaelith finished, his eyes locked on hers with an intensity that was purely predatory. For weeks, Thorn moved toward the door, but Chen was already there, blocking it. "Nobody leaves, not until we get some answers about why you were so eager to kill a man who was clearly recovering." Morrison sank into a chair, his career probably flashing before his eyes. Lyra tried to pull her wrist free, but Kaelith held on, his grip getting stronger by the second. "You thought," he whispered, each word an effort, but, filled with venom, "I wouldn't hear, wouldn't know, wouldn't remember. Kaelith, please, I can explain." "Explain?" His voice was getting stronger. "Explain how you tried to kill me? Explain how you and Thorn planned to take everything I built?" Thorn lunged for a different exit, but security guards who'd been listening outside burst in. Not hospital security, real police. The ones the district attorney had assigned after Webb's arrest. As officers surrounded Thorn, reading him his rights, as Lyra collapsed into sobs that no one believed anymore. As Morrison frantically called his lawyers, Vaelen stood frozen beside the bed. Kaelith released Lyra's wrist and reached for Vaelen's hand instead. His fingers intertwined with hers, and when he looked at her, the predator was gone. In its place was something raw and vulnerable. "You saved me," he said simply. "You saved yourself," she replied. "I just made sure you had time to do it." Chen was already on his phone, probably calling the district attorney. Morrison was being escorted out for questioning. Lyra and Thorn were being read their rights, their perfect plan destroyed by the one variable they'd never accounted for. A doctor who cared too much and a man too stubborn to die. But as the chaos swirled around them, as police took statements and lawyers shouted and the hospital descended into crisis mode, Vaelen had only one thought. Now that Kaelith was awake, now that he had his voice back, now that he had his power returning, what would he become? The monster everyone feared, or something different? And did she have any right to hope it would be the latter? 6 months later, Vaelen stood in front of Crescent Bay Medical Center for the last time as an employee. Her resignation letter had been accepted with what she suspected was relief. The hospital wanted to forget the scandal. The doctor who'd exposed corruption, prevented a murder, and destroyed the reputation of one of their senior physicians was a reminder they didn't need. She didn't mind. The job had stopped meaning anything the moment she'd realized how easily medicine could be weaponized by people with enough money and motive. A black car pulled up to the curb. Expensive. The kind that made people look twice. The driver stepped out and opened the rear door, and Vaelen climbed inside, her cardboard box of personal belongings balanced on her lap. Kaelith sat in the back seat, looking nothing like the broken man who'd lain in room 9. He'd regained most of his motor function through months of aggressive physical therapy. He could walk now, though he still tired easily. His speech had returned completely, and his control over the Azure Syndicate had been restored with a brutality that made the news for weeks. Thorne and Lyra were both awaiting trial. Morrison had lost his medical license. Chen was representing. Was Vaelen in a wrongful termination lawsuit that would probably settle quietly. And Kaelith had bought the hospital. Just walked in one day and bought the entire facility, then donated it to a nonprofit with strict ethics oversight. You didn't have to do that, Vaelen had told him when she heard. Yes, he'd replied. I did. Now, sitting beside him in the car, she felt the weight of the past 6 months settle over her. Everything had changed. She'd lost her career, gained a reputation as either a hero or a troublemaker, depending on who you asked. And somehow, inexplicably, become the one person Kaelith Sol trusted completely. Where are we going? She asked, though she suspected she knew. Somewhere you need to say. The car drove through the city, past neighborhoods that grew progressively more upscale, until they reached a building that made Vaelen's breath catch. A medical center. Brand new, 5 stories of glass and steel with her name on a bronze plaque by the entrance. The Rho Medical Institute, Kaelith said, specializing in cases other hospitals give up on. Patients who need someone who won't stop fighting for them. Vaelen stared at the building. You built me a hospital. You saved my life. This is a very small repayment. Kaelith, this cost? Nothing that matters. He turned to face her, and she saw something in his eyes she'd only seen glimpses of before. Vulnerability. You asked me once what happens when I get out of that bed. You were afraid I'd go back to being the monster. She had been afraid of that. Terrified, actually. I can't change what I am, he continued. The Syndicate still exists. I still control things most people would find horrific. But you made me remember something I'd forgotten. What? That power without purpose is just violence, and violence without restraint is just chaos. He gestured to the building. This is purpose, helping people who can't help themselves. The way you helped me. Vaelen felt tears sting her eyes. You're trying to balance the scales. I'm trying to be someone you don't have to be ashamed of knowing. The honesty in those words broke something open in her chest. This man, this criminal, this monster who'd built an empire on fear, was trying to change. Not completely, not into something he could never be, but enough. Enough to honor what she'd risked for him. I'm not ashamed, she said quietly. I never was. He reached for her hand, the same hand that had held his through those terrible nights in room 9. Then run this hospital. Save the people no one else will fight for. And let me help you do it. She looked at the building, then back at him. What about us? What are we now? It was the question that had hung between them for months. The doctor and the criminal, the woman who saved him and the man who owned her hospital. The boundaries were blurred beyond recognition. We're partners, Kaelith said, in ways that defy every rule. But rules never saved either of us, did they? No, rules hadn't saved them. Caring had saved them. Refusing to give up had saved them. Trusting each other when the whole world said they shouldn't had saved them. Partners, Vaelen agreed. Then with a smile that felt like the first real one in months, she added, "But I'm in charge of the hospital. You don't get to buy your way out of malpractice suits." He laughed. Actually laughed. The sound was rusty, but genuine. "Agreed. Medical decisions are yours. Everything else we negotiate." The driver opened the door and they stepped out together. As they walked toward the entrance of the Rho Medical Institute, past the bronze plaque with her name, Vaelen realized something profound. She'd spent her whole life trying to save people according to rules written by others, trying to fit her compassion into boxes labeled appropriate and professional. But some people couldn't be saved by following rules. Some battles required breaking every boundary, and sometimes the only way to truly heal was to acknowledge that the world wasn't divided neatly into good and evil. It was messy and complicated and full of people who were both. Kaelith held the door open for her. Inside, she could see state-of-the-art equipment, spacious patient rooms, and a staff she'd personally selected. People who'd been pushed out of other hospitals for caring too much, for fighting too hard, for refusing to give up on the lost causes. "What do you think?" Kaelith asked. Vaelen thought about the journey that had brought them here, about a man lying motionless in a hospital bed, communicating through heart rate spikes, about whispered plots and attempted murders, about the moment she'd decided to fight for someone everyone else had written off. "I think," she said slowly, "that we're going to save a lot of people who deserve a second chance. Like I got. Like we both got." They walked inside together, into a building built from the ashes of everything they'd lost and everything they'd become. The Dragon of Soul and the doctor who'd refused to let him die. Partners in healing. Partners in defying expectations. Partners in proving that sometimes the most profound acts of redemption begin in the darkest places. And as the doors closed behind them, Vaelen knew one thing with absolute certainty. She'd lost her old life to save his. And somehow, in the process, she'd found something better. Purpose, partnership, and the kind of connection that only forms when two people see each other at their worst and choose to stay anyway. Room 9 was empty now, just another hospital room in a facility under new management. But the lessons learned there would echo through every patient they treated, every life they fought for, every time they refused to accept that someone was beyond saving. Because they'd both learned the same truth in that room. The most powerful thing you can do for another person isn't to fix them, or change them, or make them into something they're not. It's to see them, fully and completely, flaws and all, and decide they're worth fighting for anyway. And that was a truth worth building a hospital on. The end. You just spent an hour with this story. Now give me 60 seconds, like this video right now. Not later, now. While you still feel something. Subscribe and hit that notification bell. Because if this story mattered, but you don't subscribe, you're lying to yourself. And share it. Just one person who needs to hear about fighting for people others have given up on. Someone scrolling right now needs this story, but they'll never find it if you stay silent. Comment, like, subscribe, share. 4 actions, 1 minute. If you can't do that, after everything you just heard, then maybe it never really touched you at all. Your silence buries stories that could change lives. Don't be that person. Engage.